Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Tenant Talk Live. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a pretty full night tonight. My name is Brooke Schipporeit, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the manager of field organizing at NLIHC, and I'm filling in for your usual host, Sid, who has been traveling all day. She's still with us, but I said I would fill in for her for tonight. And I'd like to welcome you all to Tenant Talk Live, where we provide opportunities for residents to connect with NLIHC and one another, share best practices, and learn how to be more involved in influencing federal housing policies and leading in their communities. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later this week. Today's topic is on the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, often referred to as LIHTC. And LIHTC differs from HUD programs that you may be more familiar with and can be difficult to access and understand with its many rules and guidelines. But because it is still an important affordable housing resource, we've brought in two experts from the Pennsylvania Regional Housing Legal Services to provide an overview for us tonight. So before we turn to them, I first want to turn to Emma Foley, a research analyst at NLIHC, and she's going to be briefly sharing about NLIHC's LIHTC Tenant project. So Emma, go ahead.
Thank you, Brooke, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I just wanted to share a little bit about a project that the coalition is conducting around experiences of tenants in low-income housing tax credit properties. I actually think I see a few people who participated in interviews for this project when it first started earlier this year, but we're starting the project back up and we're aiming to learn about experiences of tenants in properties that are aging out of their affordability period or have recently aged out of their affordability period and the affordability restrictions expired. And so I will put my email in the chat, but essentially I'm just looking to conduct interviews with tenants in properties where the affordability period has expired. And if you are one of those people or you might know some people, do feel free to reach out to me. And I would love to talk to you and hear more about your experiences. The research overall aims to document the experiences of tenants in LIHTC properties that are aging out, the challenges that they face, and also public policy or programs that tenants would propose or like to see to remedy some of the challenges of these properties expiring. So I will put my email in the chat, but I will leave it there and hand it back to Brooke.
Thanks so much, Emma, and hope you all do reach out to Emma with any questions or interest in participating in that project. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers from Pennsylvania's Regional Housing Legal Services, Cindy Daley and Kim Dolan. Cindy is the Director of Community Redevelopment Initiatives, and Kim is a Senior Staff Attorney. They have put together a comprehensive tenant's guide to renting a LIHTC home and are going to share an overview of that guide with you all now. And they'll answer any questions at the end of their presentation, so please be submitting questions as they come to you throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'll leave it to you, Cindy and Kim.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Brooke and Emma and Sid for inviting us, and thank you all for joining this conversation today. Let me first share my screen because you're not going to be you don't have to look at me. This is a guide that Regional Housing produced, Kim and I worked on, and it is available in English and Spanish on our website. If the link was not already circulated, we'll be sure to circulate it after this presentation. So, renting a LIHTC home, we decided to use the abbreviation LIHTC instead of low-income housing tax credit programs for two reasons. One, it's a lot easier to say. But the other is that the name can be confusing, the program name. We did some focus groups with tenants and found that some of the tenants were wondering how they could get their tax credit. Unfortunately, it's not a tax credit for tenants. It's a tax credit for owners who are building or renovating apartments it provides a financial incentive to keeping the rents low. And we'll be explaining how the rents are set and what the maximum rents are. So I do need to say that because we're a Pennsylvania-based organization, this guide does have a slant toward Pennsylvania. Most of the rules are federal. They're set by the IRS, not by HUD, although there is some overlap. And when we talk about income limits, we'll be talking about limits set by HUD. But it's an IRS program. But each state has the ability to add things, to prioritize things. And so there will be some parts of it that, if you're not living in Pennsylvania, aren't applicable. But I think for the most part, you'll be able to get something out of it. So I'm going to go through it. We're going to go through it fairly quickly. There's a lot in here that we hope is easy to understand, common questions that tenants might ask. We will leave time for questions at the end so that if we've missed anything or went through it too quickly, you can ask. And I'm going to turn over to Kim now to talk about finding and qualifying for a LIHTC apartment.
Thanks, Cindy. I assume everybody can hear me. I guess I'm going to start off by basically going through the guide. But the first question is, how do you find a LIHTC apartment, or how do you know if you're in one? So the place to start really varies depending on what state you are in. So the place to start would really be to go to your state housing finance agency. Every state has one. Their mission is to basically expand affordable housing in their state, usually through a variety of ways. One way is in issuing mortgages for that are affordable to lower income people, lower income residents, creating housing programs and supporting affordable housing. And then for the purposes of what we're here today, administering the federal LIHTC program in their state. Now, I said it's called a housing finance agency. It's usually called, it's sometimes called a housing finance agency, but it's really different depending on which state you are in. And if you need help on finding the agency in your state, I can give you a link to a site that links to all of the other housing finance agencies. Sometimes it's called, for example, in Delaware, it's called the State Housing Authority, Delaware State Housing Authority. In Wisconsin, it's Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, et cetera. And in California, it's pretty unusual. It's called the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So it doesn't have, I was going to say it usually has housing in its name, but California is the outlier and doesn't. So, but if you want, I can put in the chat after, in between when it's Cindy's turn to present, I can put in the chat a list of how to find your local state housing finance agency. So you can usually go to their website and search for LIHTC developments in your state. Other options for finding out if this particular property is a LIHTC property, you can ask the property manager. The property manager is usually a third-party manager that specializes in tax credits, because there's rules that developers really need to follow, and if they don't, the development falls off the cliff test. Essentially, it means if you missed one of these rules, you could basically lose all of your tax credits. So you have to make sure that you follow them. So the property manager should know what those rules are, and there are requirements that they need to share those with applicants and tenants. It needs to be public information. So that's another way you can find out if a property is a tax credit property. You can many tax credit agencies require that tax credit properties have a lease addendum that specifically spells out what the tenant's special rights are in a tax credit property. So you can look for that in the tenant's lease, in your lease. And there's also databases, national databases that you can search on particular properties, including the National Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Coalition, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, that the sponsor of this webinar has a database, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The HUD also has places you can search, and Novogradac is the name of a specialized LIHTC information house that also has information about tax credit properties. So generally speaking, tax credit properties are you can tell based on the rent, the lease, the owner type. Usually the owner is a private owner. It's often a limited partnership or a limited liability company. And also, generally speaking, since the tax credit program didn't start until 1986, most of the tax credit properties are going to have been built after 1986. Although you can get tax credits for rehab, so it's possible that there is a building that got tax credits and it was existing at the time, so it might predate 1986. Okay, I think I talked enough about how to find properties. In terms of qualifying, I mean, the big thing about qualifying and what these specialists that I talked about, the specialist property managers, specialize in is making sure that the tenants are income qualified. And Cindy mentioned that tenants can't make over a certain amount. It's area median income tables, and it's usually 60%. Now, developments will have different apartments and target at different income levels. They'll maybe some apartments set aside for people at 60%, others at 50%, and 50% is area median income. If you're not familiar with that, I can let Cindy talk about that in more detail. It's basically published annually by HUD, and it varies depending on the location and where you are in the country. Are you in a metropolitan area or not? And it's updated every year. So there's 60% units, 50% units. Some states require, and in Pennsylvania, it's a threshold requirement that developers allow to have some units at 20% at the very low income. But generally speaking, you're going to see more units at the higher levels of income. So that's the first thing. You have to look at income to make sure that a particular family doesn't exceed to qualify for a unit, and then there and of course then it's basically what most market rate property managers look at when they're evaluating an application for an apartment. So they look at your credit history, they look at your income to make sure you have enough money to spend to afford the rent that you're applying for. If you're on fixed incomes, you can't afford the LIHTC property, and many of our clients who work in supportive services will find that their clients just can't afford the LIHTC program. So there's also things that LIHTC properties may be designated for special populations. Usually seniors is a big thing, 62 or maybe 55 plus, or maybe some have special needs populations that they serve. So that's something that you need to be aware of too. So I'll stop there, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Cindy to talk about rent.
Okay, this is the fun part, and I'm going to put my glasses on for this one. So rents in LIHTC units are very complicated. At least the way the rent is set can be complicated to follow. There is one thing you need to know, and really the main thing you need to understand is that rents in LIHTC apartments are not set according to each tenant's income. So if you are familiar with public housing or housing choice vouchers, you're going to be paying, for the most part, 30% of your income for housing, for rent, and for utilities. That is probably not going to be the case in LIHTC, although I'm going to talk in a minute about that 30% calculation. So as Kim, so what it is that the rents are set to be affordable to an imaginary person at that income limit. So if it's a 60% AMI, the Census Bureau says what the incomes range is in an area. HUD determines the Census Bureau determines what the median, let's say the middle or the average income is by different household sizes. HUD does a big chart and calculates affordable rent at different income levels. So the IRS does use those HUD income levels. If the owner has designated an apartment at, I'm going to drop down to what's in our chart here, for people to be affordable to someone at 40% of the area median income, that's how the rents are set. And I'm going to show you how that calculation is done. So you could have identical apartments, same floor plan, same size, but one's designated to be affordable at 40% of AMI, one's affordable to people at 20%, they're going to have very different rents. So your next door neighbor may be paying a different amount of rent. Also, and of course, the rent's going to go up like any apartment by the size. So if it's got 4 bedrooms, it costs more than 1 bedroom. Rents will also vary according to the number of people living there. And in fact, I'm going to jump to that right now. Bear with me. So, as I said, the area median income that HUD publishes is not only to say this is what the average is for people at, 20% of area median income, but it varies by the size of the household. So for one person, 20% of AMI is lower than for 3 people or for 5 people. And of course, 20% is extremely low income. It's like, you take all the incomes, you look at the middle, then you cut it in half for 50%. You cut it even lower for 20%. I want you to remember this number. Well, you don't have to remember it. I'm going to show it to you again. So if you're at the 50% area median income and you have 3 people in your household, the maximum income limit is going to be $43,500. And that's the number that LIHTC uses to calculate the rent. So I'm going to, move down here. And again, these numbers are from Philadelphia and they're from last year because that's when we wrote the guide. So for a 3-person household, we just saw the $43,500 annual, of course, that's per year. To calculate the rent, divide it by 12 to get a monthly income. Multiply it by 30%. Remember, so we're back to affordability, paying not more than 30% of your income. And that gives you a rent, not a maximum rent, it is the rent for a 2-bedroom apartment because it's 3 people in the household. 2-bedroom apartment designated for households at 50% of area median income. The rent and utilities is $1,087. So if utilities are included, this is what the tenant pays. If utilities are not included, there is a utility allowance, just like in public housing or with vouchers. So we're going to assume for a moment that the utility allowance is $50. That comes off of the maximum of the rent. And the tenant will write a check, give a money order, whatever, to the management company every month for $1,037 and have $50 left to pay utility bills. So this is for a 50% AMI unit. Let's go back here for a second. Suppose you don't have that much money. If the apartment is designated for people with much less income at 20% of area median income, we use the same calculation. Here, a 3-person household would only have $17,400 a year. Again, divided by 12 for a monthly income, multiply that by 30%. and the rent will be $435 a month. So keep that $435 in mind for just a second while I skip back. And here it is, bingo, $435. Again, the 20% area median income, a 2-bedroom apartment, because we were looking at a family of 3. So, so that's how they come up with what the rent is. And in this case, we're going to assume a utility allowance of $45, and the management company actually gets $390 a month. What this chart is about, though, is not so much the maximum rent as the minimum, because not everybody is going to have exactly $17,400 a year. In fact, most people won't, but you could still qualify if you have a little bit less than that. The landlord, the management company, will be looking to see that you have enough income to pay the rent. So again, this is not like public housing where no matter what your income, you can move in and the government, the housing authority, pays what you can't afford to pay. You have to have some income. Usually they will look for 2.5 times the rent in monthly income, maybe 3 times the rent in monthly income. So the way that plays out, this chart is based on 2.5 times. We're going to start with this $390 a month after the utility allowance comes out. Multiply that by 290, and I've forgotten exactly what that is on a monthly basis, but times 12, the yearly income is $11,700. So that's the minimum you need to rent this apartment, the minimum. This is the maximum, different household size, different maximums. But this is the minimum. So you could have, if you're a 3-person household, again, the rent was set to be 30% of income for someone earning exactly $17,400, 3-person household. But maybe your income is $11,700, maybe it's $13,000, maybe it's $15,000. You would still qualify for that apartment, but you'll be paying more than 30% of your income for that apartment. So that's a big difference between LIHTC and other HUD programs. And I think that's all I'm going to say about rent. Right? No, that's not all I'm going to say, because if you're lucky enough to have a housing choice voucher, you can rent a LIHTC apartment. You cannot be turned away because you have a voucher. You can be turned away for other reasons that Kim talked about, but not because you have a voucher. And in that case, you can forget everything I just told you, because you will pay 30%, or, you know, there are some variations within the voucher program, but basically you'll be paying 30% of your income. Okay, back to Kim.
All right. Well, you know, Cindy, that was really, I thought it was really clear. I mean, really nice job. Really nice job. I mean, it gets it to be very, very complicated. So thank you. And we've been doing this for a couple of weeks now. So yeah, I'm not going to go on Comedy Central anytime soon. But yes, so very nice job. So let me just say a few things about what Cindy said. So, and I'm trying to follow what's going on in the chat a little bit too. So, I guess it's important to know that if you have a LIHTC property, it could be that not all of the units in the property are actually LIHTC. Sometimes developers will put together projects where only some of them are assisted with LIHTC. So if you're being, you know, so if a question is, am I being gouged on the rent? Then the question is, are you in one of those mixed income buildings? And, you know, are you in a non-LIHTC unit? So that's a question to ask. I can tell you that, you know, it's, you know, when I talked about that cliff test earlier, and if you're getting charged more than the program maximum rent, I mean, that's a major problem for the landlord. You know, the person that owns it can't charge more than that. And if they're charging more than that, they could lose their tax credits. So that's, you know, obviously there's lots of other details you have to get to, you know, make sure you're in a LIHTC unit. But that's a major issue. So keep that in mind. And Cindy also alluded to this at the end of her her discussion on how rents are set. a lot of times LIHTC properties will have other financing in it, including project-based vouchers. So there may be some LIHTC buildings that are for special needs populations that are 100% project-based vouchered. So everybody in there is only paying 30% of their income because it has a project, it has a voucher attached to it. So, and that's certainly true in Pennsylvania. A lot of times, the LIHTC only gives you a certain percentage of your development costs. So landlords will need, or developers will need, other sources to come in. And so you might see that as well. And the last thing I'm going to say is, Cindy's going through the chart, it turned, basically that exercise, and maybe I shouldn't even say this, but that exercise gets you to why most people in a LIHTC property, if they're paying the maximum rent, are paying more than 30% of their income to rent, because if they make less than that cutoff, or anything less than that cutoff, then they're going to be paying more than 30% of the rent of their income towards rent. 30 to maybe up to 40 or even 50% in some cases. So that's, unless you're right at that, if you make the maximum income, then, so that's the quirk of how rents are set in the LIHTC program. So anyway, so let me talk a little bit. Okay, so what are some of the other things about qualifying for LIHTC housing? I have a criminal history. Can I still rent? Well, landlords are every landlord is different. Every state is different. Usually a criminal background check is one of the things that's part of the rental application. Generally speaking, if you have a serious felony, or a violent felony or a drug manufacturer charge, that can be an issue for you getting an apartment. That could be a basis for a landlord rejecting your application. If it's a much more minor offense, if it's a misdemeanor, it's something that happened a long time ago. If it's just an arrest, that if the landlord is rejecting all applicants with any kind of justice involvement, then that is a red flag, and they're probably violating the fair housing law. So that's an issue. Each landlords are supposed to have policies that everybody should be, everybody's application, everybody's criminal history should be weighed on a case-by-case basis. So if they're doing this blanket thing, that's a problem. And if you're somebody, or if you're helping somebody, if you're someone with a serious felony, then your only option may be the clean slate laws, or expungement, or even a pardon. So that's something that you can and there are new movements, new clean slate laws. Pennsylvania just passed one that can help with that kind of thing. So let me talk about there's special student rules. When this program was started, obviously they didn't, students don't have income, so they didn't want students to be able to qualify the housing. So there, if you're a full-time student, you're essentially, or there's a full-time student in your household, that's, let's see, you can be a student and live in an apartment as long as you're not a full-time student, unless you fit one of these exceptions. So you're on temporary assistance for needy families, or you're in a job training program, you're a single parent with minor children, and you're in school, or you receive foster care. So these are the federal laws. So this should be across all states. The property managers, these specialists who know LIHTC are aware of these rules and should know them as well as anybody. Of course, whether they're willing to help you is another question, but that's why we have advocates like the host of this webinar, and Cindy and myself. Accessible units, many in Pennsylvania, for example, I can speak that with authority. Developers need to have so many accessible units as part of their submission when they apply for the tax credits. They're allowed to, the goal is to fill a family who needs the accessibility features. If you need a turning radius for wheelchairs, if you need to have doors that are wide enough and bathrooms that are wide enough, then the goal is to have somebody that needs those accessibility features in the unit, but if you can't find someone, if the developer can't find someone, they can put another family in the unit. But as long as in that family's lease, it says that they can be moved if a person who needs the accessibility features in the unit that you've occupied comes along. So that's the way it's handled in Pennsylvania. I'm sure other states do it similarly. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about credit checks. I can skip over that. If you're not eligible, there really should be a way to appeal that. That really varies depending. And since I'm talking to all 50 states, I really can't tell you what that is, but I can tell you what the process is everywhere because I just don't know what it is. But if you're having issues with that, if you're being denied, for example, because you're a survivor and VAWA applies to you, then you should know that. And if you're getting, we have a right to ask for the reason that you've been denied, or if you have a criminal history and you think that you're being discriminated against, you have a right to have that, to know what that is and to challenge it. And if you're having issues with that, you need to contact your local legal aid office. They can help you with that. Let's see. All right. I guess it's now back to you, Cindy.
Okay. And I'll just say VAWA is Violence Against Women's Act. So there are protections for people who are survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault. Yes, so immigration. Question about do you need, what if you don't have documentation? There's nothing in the LIHTC rules that says you can't live in a LIHTC apartment. However, especially, I know in Pennsylvania, this may not be as true in places with higher rents, but in Pennsylvania, you really can't develop LIHTC apartments with just LIHTC funding. There's almost always going to be some other funding in there, whether it's community development block grant money or foundation money or something else. If there is other federal money in there, or the vouchers that we talked about, if there's other federal money in there, there may very well be restrictions on immigrant, documentation. And for instance, if Kim mentioned project-based vouchers, so vouchers that are attached to the apartments rather than tenant has the voucher. There's what's called the mixed family rule. So if at least one family member has lawful status, you can move in, but the amount of subsidy is prorated. LIHTC itself does not prohibit people from moving in because they don't have proper documentation. What if I'm put on a wait list? That's great, stay on the wait list. Most of these do have waiting lists, but keep in touch with management, not only to ask, is anything opened up, but especially keep in touch if there are changes in your situation. If you've moved, make sure you give them the new address because they will purge their waiting list. They do it by sending out letters and they don't hear from somebody and they drop their name from the waiting list. But also, if your income changes, if your family size changes, you may qualify for a different apartment. So when you apply, you're put on the waiting list for a 50% AMI apartment, but now you have another child, same income, another child, you would probably qualify for a 40% AMI. Or you got a raise at work, you might qualify for a 60% AMI. So let them know when you have any change. All right, we want to keep moving this along here. So Kim, back to you.
Sure, thanks, Cindy. So once you're a resident, I find that I'm trying not to get distracted by the comments. I think that they're really, really interesting, and I think the debate in there we could go on forever about it. So I'm not going to look at the comments for now. So what to expect once you're a resident? So once you're a resident, you'll be initially certified, and then there'll be an annual certification every year. If you're a mixed income building, that's going to be more. landlords are required, at least our landlords are required to be a little bit more strict about that recertification process. The rules for 100% LIHTC units are a little bit more relaxed on recertification. But each state is different, and each state will have its own requirements. So that I'm talking about the federal rules. Each state will have its own requirements on recert. So generally, Cindy says you need to report if your household changes in size, income on everybody, whether somebody's a full-time student, and then changes in your assets. So those are the big things. If somebody moves in with you, that's an issue. So you need to make sure that's, even if they're not related, that needs to be notified. You need to notify them up front, or the landlord could have good cause to evict you. Because let's see, what else do we have? Right, yeah, I talked a little bit about that. Let's see, let me look at my notes. Hold on.
One thing on income, Kim, and that is, what if your income goes up above the limit?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Yeah. So if your income goes up above the limit, the LIHTC program has a very surprising rule and this is actually backed by some IRS guidance. IRS, not HUD, because IRS is the administrator of the LIHTC program because it's a tax credit. The surprising rule is that can't be good cause to evict you, simply because if when you first qualified, you met the income limits, you were below the maximum income, but in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, your income goes above that. That alone can't be good cause to evict you. So that's a very surprising rule. So, theoretically, somebody could be in an LIHTC apartment, for, the rest of their lives, or at least until the building reaches the end of the compliance period. I think that's mostly theory and not practice, but that's an interesting quirk to the rule, because there are ways that it, I don't want to get into the minutia of the tax credit rules, the things that these property managers need to know. But there's a thing called the next available unit rule, which allows developers to keep people who have gone above the income limit, to keep tenants in the property and still get tax credits from them. So, all right, so I won't talk about that. Can I be made to change apartments? Yes, I mentioned earlier about the accessible apartment in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure in other states, if you're in an accessible apartment because the landlord couldn't find somebody, for the first 30 or 60 days, the unit was vacant to get in there, and then you get into the unit, the landlord can make you move. If you move within the building, you shouldn't have to be recertified. If you're moving to a different building, you might have to be recertified. So that could be a chance of, so if you're one of those lucky people whose income goes above the maximum, that could be a reason why moving from another building, recertification could be a reason why you wouldn't qualify anymore. But if you're just moving within the same building, that shouldn't be an issue. Other circumstances where we see tenants move is if there's rehabilitation to the building. Like, a lot of times, after 15, 20 years, these buildings need to be upgraded, as people have mentioned in the chat. And so landlords will have you move temporarily. So that's another reason that you can be moved. Let's see. Is there anything else that let me just check my notes and see if I wanted to talk about anything else here. I don't think so. All right.
Okay. So very quickly, I will emphasize that LIHTC apartments have good cause eviction requirements, which again, if you're in public housing choice vouchers, you're familiar with, but in many states for private housing, including Pennsylvania, we don't have good cause eviction. So this is a really terrific benefit to have good cause protections. What does good cause mean? The landlord has to have a good reason to kick you out, like you never pay your rent. If you miss one rent payment, but you're generally on time and you pay your rent, then missing one payment, or eventually being late with one payment is not good cause. So we put in a few examples here. There is no exhaustive list of what constitutes good cause. It's really determined on a case-by-case basis. It may be determined in the court because they tried to evict you, and you make the case that this reason, I had a party one time, that's not good cause. So just keep in mind there is good cause protection. See anything else? It has to be serious and repeated. I think that's in the IRS regs and not just in Pennsylvania's lease, but has to be serious and repeated violation of the lease. Not totally clear whether serious is one category and repeated violation is another, but probably it has to be something serious. So good cause eviction. We went through this stuff. We'll just mention the fair housing resource. These are actually pretty Pennsylvania specific, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, but every state should have its own fair housing group. And the ones in PA do a really nice job of explaining fair housing law. So.
And also, I'm sorry, we put in a link to Pennsylvania legal aid, but keep in mind that when you do run into problems, whether you're denied, you think for the wrong reason, or you're being evicted, contact your local legal aid program.
Yeah. So, and I see a question about what happens to rent at the end of the compliance period. So the compliance periods vary. I forget if we talked about this.
We didn't. We should.
Yeah. So in when the program started in 1986, it was 15 years. In 1989, it changed to 30 years. And every state has a layer on top of that they can add additional years. In Pennsylvania, it was 30 years for a long time. And then in 2019, that went up to 35, and now it's 40 years. In Vermont, it's forever, right, Cindy? I mean, Vermont requires people who get LIHTC, developers who get LIHTC to agree to permanent affordability. So every state is different, and you should be able to find that by going to the housing agency in your state to find that out. So the rule at the end, so the IRS has specific rules for what happens at the end of the compliance period. So let's say it's the usual 30 years. And so at the end of 30 years, tenants need to be given notice, and they get, I believe it's 3 years, not 2. Is that right, Cindy? I think it's 3 years to continue to operate as low income housing. And then after the 3rd year, they can convert it to market rate. So there's got to be notice. Obviously, it's got to be notice, for I don't know what the, you got to give notice, and so there's protections. They can't raise the rents above the tax credit maximums for 3 years after the end of the compliance period. So in terms of, I guess I have to go back and look at what the notice requirements are. I'm not sure I know that off the top of my head. So.
Excuse me. So yeah, the compliance period or the extended use period, the time in which those rents have to stay affordable. Now, one thing we didn't say, they can go up every year, but they go up according to the HUD published limits because HUD every year, HUD will change the income maximum, what area median income is, and it's generally increasing over time. And so you do that, you meaning like the manager, the owner does that recalculation every year, or the housing finance agency does that recalculation of what is affordable to somebody at 50% of area median income. So they send out a new rent schedule. So the rents can go up. They just don't go up or down, rarely go down, based on your income. So I do see a question about if you're at 40% of AMI when you move in, and I'll assume that you're in an apartment designated for 40%. And then your income goes down, so you're like at 30%, can you be forced to move out? I mean, again, you have to have enough income to pay the rent. And I would think, this is off the top of my head, if it's not based on your income, it's based on your ability to pay the rent. If you keep paying the rent, you're probably okay, but you should request to be transferred to a lower rent unit if there is one. So if they have units designated for 30% of AMI or 20%, you could request a transfer. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say we did actually an in-person presentation a couple of weeks ago with a landlord-tenant lawyer, and apparently, the good cause issue that landlords can't evict you except for good cause is a major issue because, when landlords file for evictions, they list everything, including expiration of the lease term, and it's clear that that's not enough. And if you're a judge in landlord-tenant court, you're not going to appreciate the fine the fine details of the LIHTC program and what good cause actually means. So you need to be an advocate for yourself. And if you don't have a lawyer, you need to be aware of that. Now, the thing is that good cause is a concept that's, in other subsidized housing programs. So that's something to keep in mind. But you need to be an advocate for yourself if you don't have a lawyer, just saying.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive overview, Kim and Cindy, and already jumping right into answering some of the questions. We had a lot of questions flooding in. So I'll go ahead and help field a few more of these. If you have a few minutes to stay on to answer some of these, great. I think, so I wrote this one down. I was popping back and forth between the Q&A and the chat, as Kim mentioned as well. So I apologize, but can you reiterate what the rule is for rent increases each year? Did you just answer that? If so, don't worry about it.
So rent increases, again, are not based on the tenant's income. The tenant's income can go up and the rent stays the same. So you just get a bonus that way. But because the rents are determined by the area median income for that apartment, that changes each year. And HUD publishes a new chart every year for area median income. And so there can be, and usually are, some increases in rent each year that they're supposed to cover the owner's cost increases. So again, it's not tied to income. And if your income stays the same and your rent goes up, that's one of the downsides of LIHTC.
And how can tenants see how these are calculated? Would that be on HUD's website or?
How the area median income is calculated? It's really all based on census data. Mm-hmm. So the US Census Bureau does estimates every year of household income and publishes a median income. And I don't know whether they or HUD or somebody figures it out by household size. And I know that we have a link to the chart in Pennsylvania on PHF, Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency's website. I tried to find some from other states. I tried to find something on a national basis. I mean, HUD has a more limited thing that's made publicly available. It's not as detailed as PHFA. Yeah.
And what about how rent increases are calculated? Would that just be asking the property manager or landlord?
It's the same formula that we talked about, 30% of median income for the designated income level.
Right. So, and if you really want to, like, if you're in a LIHTC unit and you really want to get into the weeds of how it's calculated, I mean, our guide really gives you the tools to figure that out. And you just need to link to the charts, the levels of AMI in your area. And usually that should be on your state housing website. But another quirky rule about the LIHTC is that they assume for family size 1.5 persons per bedroom. So if you're in a 1-bedroom, they're going to calculate the rent as if 1.5 persons are living in the apartment, which is, maybe it's a little more detail than you need. But yeah, I'll let Cindy talk about. Cindy did a great job of laying it out, and if you really want to get into the weeds of that, I think our guide can help you.
Yeah,
it always comes back to 30% of the median income for whatever percentage that unit is designated.
Great. Definitely encourage folks to check that out if you're interested in learning more about that. A few people have expressed frustrations in the chat earlier on with not being able to find non-senior 1-bedroom LIHTC homes, and I wanted to give you a chance to respond if you have any insight as to why that is, whether there's a higher demand and therefore harder to access, or if there's anything you've seen in your work that's related to that issue.
I think that I know that in Pennsylvania, probably same true elsewhere. Politically, meaning within any locality where you want to build the apartments, it's easier to do senior than family housing. Just local government, neighbors, they like old people, and they have all sorts of arguments why they don't want to do family housing. But assuming the family housing gets built, I think, Kim, am I right about this, that sometimes there is a priority or a preference or extra points given for larger units because contrary, at least where we are, contrary to this questioner's experience, if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 kids, it's really hard to find a place to live, especially a place you can afford. And so there is sometimes a preference in scoring applications for larger apartments.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And that could be why there's a shortage of non-senior 1-bedroom units out there because of that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then let's see. So if someone had kept their contact info updated, their phone number and email, but they were still dropped from the wait list, would that have to do with their address not being updated, or is that an issue that you've run into? This person said there's a place that just got built a few years ago. I was number 3 on the wait list. That was 4 years ago, but since then my name should have come up. Or is it just that it's taking that long, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there are tips for managing wait lists, and actually there's a great tip on the internet in Massachusetts. And I think it's a legal services group talked about how you manage yourself on the wait list. And basically, you just got to be a pain in the butt and bother them every few months and ask them, if you're not hearing from them, to make sure, first of all, that they have your contact info, and then you're not dropped. I mean, that's one of the tips that they give. So that sounds very suspicious that you were dropped. So, maybe that's the basis, to complain and find out what's going on, and maybe you can get back on the waiting list. I don't know.
And it is possible to be on a waiting list for a long time because, and depending on your income and family size, which units you're eligible for, not all properties, they may say, yeah, we have units designated for people at 30% of area median income, but it may be 5 apartments out of the whole, complex. And as we talked about, people don't leave readily because their rent's not going up with their income. So there's not that incentive to leave that there is in some other subsidized housing programs. So it could take a long time for your name to come up.
Yes. And as Shalonda says in the chat, Shalonda is one of our resident leaders on our board. She recommends getting a copy of the tenant selection plan, which is a great advice.
Very good. Yeah, really good advice.
Yeah.
Are LIHTC units subject to local rent controls?
We don't have rent controls. So.
Yeah, I don't know. But they're internally controlled by the LIHTC rules.
Right.
So.
Okay. Gotcha. And then we'll just ask one more question. What rights do LIHTC tenants have to organize and form a tenant association?
Yeah, I can address that one. So at the federal level, there's no federal regulation or statute that addresses the affirmative right of tenants in LIHTC properties to organize. I know that's not true of other subsidized housing programs. But keep in mind that a lot of these properties do have other subsidies in them, project-based, Section 8, public housing, or housing covered under the HUD handbook. I think it's 4350.3 of the occupancy handbook. Those rules might apply because the building has other subsidies. It's also true that, so I talked about the federal, there's no federal right to organize, but there's also no prohibition on it. So but there's no federal right, but at the state level, every state has their own allocation plan, and the state may actually have that right. I know in Pennsylvania, it's not addressed. I don't really know if that's addressed in other states, but that's also something to check. So there might be something at your state level that gives you that right. But anyway, so that's my answer to that question. Cindy, if you want to add anything, please.
All right, well, I will go ahead and leave it there. We had a lot more questions, but if you don't mind, I would love to share some of those with you after the fact and see if we can get answers out to folks after the call.
That would be fine.
Great. Thank you so much again, Cindy and Kim. Really appreciate your time and expertise.
This is great. Appreciate everybody joining.
Thank you. And before we wrap up, I have just a few other comments and kind of housekeeping items. One attendee said it really well, that this is a, really sparse system for very low and fixed income renters. So at NLIHC, we're pushing for a few improvements to the LIHTC program to better serve the lowest income renters. And I believe Sid is going to share a link to our fact sheet on this, but there's an important legislative avenue this year in Congress to advocate for, like I said, the changes to the LIHTC program to better support the lowest income renters. And we're including, advocating for reforms, including incentivizing to serve extremely low income households and those experiencing homelessness, encouraging more development in tribal nations, creating more affordable homes in rural communities, and clarifying and strengthening nonprofits' rights of first refusal and ensuring data transparency. So Sid shared that the link to the fact sheet, and then an email template to contact your members of Congress is coming soon. So be on the lookout for that. And then I also wanted to encourage you to, if you haven't already, please fill out the feedback survey for Tenant Talk Live, which Sid shared on our last call. I'll share the link to that in the chat. Please fill this out. It's really important to us to get feedback on Tenant Talk Live topics, the format, and more to make sure that this works for you. And if you, just to note, if you're already signed up for NLIHC emails, you may have noticed that you don't get the Tenant Talk Live recap straight to your inbox and its own separate email. Instead, every Friday, we send out what's called The Connection, and this email contains different news and recaps from calls that happen throughout the week. So the recap for tonight's discussion will be included in Friday's The Connection. So be on the lookout for that, which will include a link to the resource that Kim and Cindy shared, as well as other important links shared during today's discussion and a link to the recording. And then finally, I just want to remind you that we recently changed our On the Homefront blog to include resident authors each month writing about federal affordable housing issues and advocacy. So if you're interested in being a guest author or generally have a topic you think we should cover, I really encourage you to reach out to us and email either Sid or our outreach, or Sid or myself, or our outreach inbox at this email. I'll also share my email address in the chat. And yes, someone could interview you. So if you're interested, please just be sure to send us an email. Blog posts should range from 500 to 750 words, and resident contributors will receive a stipend of $150. So please just send us your name, your contact info, the topic you would like to write about, and a short description of yourself, and whether you want to be interviewed or write it yourself. And so with that, I just want to thank you all for joining tonight's Tenant Talk Live, and thanks again to our speakers for joining us. As always, if you have any questions or would like to provide suggestions for future Tenant Talk Live, discussions, please email Sydney at sbetancourt@nlihc.org, and that will be included in the recap as well. So hope you all have a great night and take care. Thanks.